When truth was lost and hearts were frozen from you, Allah came a prophet chosen, blessed Prophet Muhammad, obedient to you, taught us the things we ought to do. He taught us for certain that you are one, and that you have neither a daughter nor son. He taught us to be good to our mother and father, and that paradise lies under the feet of our mother. I love you, my prophet, and sing your praise, and follow your sunnah, prophetic ways. I love you, my prophet, and sing your praise, and follow your sunnah, prophetic ways.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Back to the Prophet. In the Quran, we're commanded by Allah, when we have difficulties in understanding our religion or how to apply our religion in our daily lives, to refer matters back to Allah and to the Prophet. And it's very important for us to understand that when we refer a matter back to Allah, that means we are looking to the sources of our faith in the text of the Holy Quran. And we understand the Quran through the example of the Messenger, peace and blessings be upon him. We only receive the Quran through the Prophet Muhammad, and he best exemplifies how to live it in daily life. I'd like to read to you a very important and interesting verse from chapter 6 of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-An'am. وَإِذَا جَاءَتْهُمْ آيَةٌ قَالُوا لَن نُؤْمِنَ حَتَّى نُؤْتَى مِثْلَ مَا أُوتِيَ رُسُلُ اللَّهِ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ حَيْثُ يَجْعَلُ رِسَالَتَهُ. And whenever a message or a sign, ayah, comes to them, they say, we shall not believe unless we are given the like of what God's apostles were given. But God knows best upon whom to bestow his message. Now this is very interesting, because in this early day in Mecca, the leaders of Mecca, who were in fact, as Allah called them, mujrimun, they were criminal people conspiring to do violence, to rob people, and were not representing the highest values of their societies. Yet they believed that Allah made a mistake in vouchsafing this revelation to Muhammad, that if any message is going to come, it ought to come to us, because we are the leaders of the society, we are the elite. وَإِذَا جَاءَتْهُمْ آيَةٌ. That means that ayah, or revelations, or signs, had appeared to them, so that they could understand the reality that this was a message from God, from Allah Almighty. But they said, لَن نُؤْمِنَ حَتَّى. We will not believe in this message until we get what we want, and that is to be given مِثْلَ مَا أُوتِيَ رُسُلُ اللَّهِ. That we want to be given something similar to what was given by Allah's messengers, what was given to them by Allah Almighty. So they said, we want the miracles to come to us. We don't want them to come through Muhammad. If an angel is going to come to Muhammad with a message, we want to see the angels. We want all of what was given to him by Allah Almighty. And this was, of course, the reality of all the prophets of God, all of Allah's messengers, that Allah set from each one of them, as he said in chapter 25, Surah Al-Furqan, for it is that with every messenger, for every prophet, we have set up from them enemies, opponents, from among the human beings and from among the jinn. So Allah Almighty has, in every time, in every place, in every nation, in every era, there are people who oppose the divine message, and that is part of the way the earth and heavens were created by Allah. Allah gave them freedom to choose or reject, to believe or disbelieve. And so it's part of the reality of Islam that there are always going to be people who disagree. And sometimes there are going to be people who are very harmful in their behavior and in their attitude toward Islam. And so it is with every prophet and messenger, and so it was with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him. وَإِذَا جَاءَتْهُمْ آيَةٌ قَالُوا لَن نُؤْمِنَ حَتَّى نُؤْتَى مِثْلَ مَا أُوتِيَ رُسُلُ اللَّهِ. When a sign and revelation comes, they're not going to believe because they have not been given by Allah miracles. They don't want to see miracles on the hands of the Prophet. They want to have the miracles themselves. And so when they witness it, they say, well, if the angels could come to the Prophet, then let the angels come to me. I'm not going to believe because God isn't taking the time to send me angels out of the sky. Or the Quran should just come down floating out of the clouds in the sky, and we should all see and witness that miracle. Then we're going to believe. But unless Allah does what we demand of Him, we are not going to believe in the message. And so what was the response of the Quran to that? Allahu a'lamu haythu yaj'alu risalatah. Allah knows best in whom to vouchsafe His revelation, His message for Allah. Allah knows best who is of the standard of character, honesty, and ethical and moral behavior and judgment that that person should receive the message of Allah and exemplify it for human beings. And by this reason, we will say in the famous contemporary slogan, the medium is the message. That is, the personality of the messenger, the personality of the prophet, is just as important as the message itself. That's a well-known phrase that's coined in modern times. Today we use this term media as if it were a very ancient phrase that everyone knows. In fact, media is the plural of medium. And the word medium means an intermediary. That is, the one who is between the recipient of a message and the one who sent the message. That is, the messenger is the medium. And so we use media in the plural, referring to all the different types of media: print media, audio, video, electronic, everything that we have today, we call that all media. But this is a fairly new term. In fact, that term was coined only in the 1960s. And so it's very recent. It was actually coined by Marshall McLuhan, who is actually from Canada. And he made this very important observation: the medium is the message. And that is very interesting. He's saying that when you read a message, you have to look at who brought you that message. That is, a message that came to you over the internet is going to be understood differently than something that came over television or the radio or through the print media. And so the way that you receive a message is just as important as what the message contains. And so when a message comes to you from a very official source that has a lot of authority in the society, it's going to be received in one way. And a message that comes from perhaps a very informal or unrecognized source is going to be seen in another way. And so the medium affects the society very much, just as much as that message does itself. And so the importance of the messenger in evaluating the message cannot be overemphasized. The idea, as Quraysh said, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا نُزِلَ هَذَا الْقُرْآنُ عَلَى رَجُلٍ مِنَ الْقَرْيَتَيْنِ. If this Qur'an would only been sent down to one of the important leaders, the leading men of the two leading societies, that is Makkah and Ta'if at that time. These were the two leading cities in Arabia. And each of these cities had men who were the important leaders. And very often these were basically the leaders of criminal gangs. And sometimes some of these people were actually of high repute. But more often than not, their character was not up to the high levels of society. And so we find today in modern societies, the leaders who claim to represent the ideals and the values of that society rarely, if ever, actually live up to even the average or norm in their society, let alone actually be leaders who should be followed by their people. And so these people did not like it that Allah would send His message to somebody who was not powerful, who was not of the inner circle, and who could not receive their pressure and who would not react to their advice and their pressure upon him. And this was because of their envy and their hatred of the messenger of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So they could not accept the message, no matter how good it was, no matter how many proofs came of its truthfulness, because of the messenger. He did not meet their standard. He was not of their class, or so they felt. He was not equal to their society, and therefore they would not accept it. Despite the fact that he had been well known before ever receiving any revelation from God, he was called Al-Amin, the trustworthy among his people. Despite the fact that he was of equally noble descent, that his father and grandfather were people of noble descent. They came from Abraham through Ismail, peace and blessings be upon both of them. And his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, was a very famous leader of Makkah in his day. And this Abu Sufyan, one of the leaders of Quraysh, one of the leaders of Makkah, himself bore witness. Years later, he met the emperor, the Caesar of the Roman Empire, Heraclius. And Heraclius had received the letter sent to him by Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him. And so he wanted to ask one of the people from his country about this man. And so Abu Sufyan had gone there on a trip for trading. And so he asked him several questions. Is he a person of noble descent from among you? And so Abu Sufyan was very honest. He said, yes, he is. He's a person of noble descent from among us. This was very important because this was like what product, when a product has a name brand, it's very familiar to us today. So we might be given two drinks, two beverages, and they both probably taste exactly the same, but one of them has a very famous brand, and so we're going to trust that, and we're probably going to order that rather than something that we've never heard of before. And so when they saw that somebody was of a famous family, well known, of leadership and moral character, they would trust that person more. And so the prophets and messengers came from noble descent. Their ancestors were prophets and messengers and people of the highest order in their society. And so the Prophet Muhammad was a person who was well known among them. The message of Islam came to them through this person. They said, was he ever known to lie? Was he a person who was dishonest? And he said, honestly, no. He was always honest to us. And so even though Abu Sufyan was jealous of the Prophet Muhammad, did not believe in him and rejected his message, yet because of his high character, he knew him very well and he answered honestly to the Emperor of Rome that the Prophet Muhammad is an honest and trustworthy person of well-known lineage among us, and therefore we ought to trust his message, yet we have rejected him. Why? We have rejected the messenger because we are jealous and envious of him, not because of any flaw in his character, but simply because of our own personal likes and dislikes. And so the message of the Prophet Muhammad came from God directly, but he himself was chosen by God to exemplify and carry that message through his high and noble standard of conduct, his unimpeachable character. We will be back shortly. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
I love you, my prophet, and sing your praise and follow your sunnah, prophetic ways.
The Philosophy of Islamic Law, a program for restoring belief and trust within Muslims' mind and heart, and for re-establishing a true concept about Islamic rules for others.
I love you, my prophet, and sing your praise and follow your sunnah, prophetic ways.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to our program, Back to the Prophet. Before the break, we were talking about the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. That God Almighty bore witness that it is Allah, that is God alone, who knows in whom to vouchsafe His message, His revelation to humanity. And so the Prophet Muhammad was chosen because of who he was, his personality, his conduct, his trustworthiness, and his position among his people. And so choosing the right medium for your message is just as important as the message itself. Abu Sufyan was one of his opponents, yet when asked, he truthfully replied that the Prophet Muhammad was a very well-known brand among them. He was of a very well-known, honorable descent, and he was a person known to be honest and truthworthy. Therefore, a person like that, you would be very open to listening to their message. And yet, he was not open because of his own personal grudge, his own negative feelings of jealousy and envy of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And so, the message of Islam came to us from a person who was very well known to exemplify the highest level of morality and ethics among human beings. He was descended of Abraham and Ismail. His grandfather was a very well-known leader, and the current leaders of his society were actually relatives not distantly related to him. And so Allah knows best in whom to place the responsibility for conveying the message. He wants to pick the person who not only represents the meaning of the message and exemplifies it, but will convey the message correctly and will be accepted by people. And so the message will not be refuted because of inconsistencies in the character and the life of the person who is carrying out that message. And so those people who rejected the message did not do so because there was some flaw in the book that was sent down from heaven, or because they did not see ayat, or there were no signs, or there were no miracles that would help them to accept this message. And all those things came, as are clearly mentioned in the Quran itself. But in fact, there was nothing wrong with the book. Or today, if you were to see it, probably it would be in form of a movie. There's nothing wrong with the story in the movie. There's nothing wrong with the characters, but actually they don't like the star of the movie. They want to be the star themselves. They want to be the centers of attention. And so the leaders of the society always want the eyes of everyone upon themselves. They would love to always be 24 hours a day on the television. They want their picture to be in the front page of the newspapers. They want everything to cover all the reporters and all the media to cover them, everything they do and everything they say, and treat it as it's very, very important. And so when there comes from Allah a divine message and a messenger who immediately attracts the attention of well-meaning, pious, and humble individuals, and they listen carefully to his message and follow it, and do not listen to the selfish, vain leaders of the society who wish for all the attention, they become very jealous. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَمَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَهْدِيهُ يَشْرَ صَدْرُهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. When God Almighty desires to guide someone, He opens his heart or his bosom to Islam. That is, to the humble people who sincerely want guidance and direction from Allah. They sincerely desire in their nature divine guidance. He opens their hearts to Islam. وَمَنْ يُرِدْ أَنْ يُذِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرُهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. When He wants someone to go into error and to reject the message, He makes their heart to be narrow and constricted. And Allah gives a very infamous example of that. كَأَنَّمَا يَسْعَدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ. As if he were ascending into the sky or into heaven. And so as a person ascends into the high elevations in the mountains, or you mount up into the sky in an aircraft, the air becomes very thick, or very thin, the oxygen becomes very weak, and your bosom, your lungs become constricted, you feel tight. And the example of that in the Arabic language of this word for dayq, haraj. It means, in the Arabic language, in the best example, when a shepherd is herding his sheep in the desert, and the sheep go under the thorn bushes, and the shepherd wants to retrieve them, and they're caught in those bushes. And then he tries very hard to squeeze through those thorny bushes, and he can't reach the sheep. And he reaches very hard with his stick in his hands, but there are thorns, and it's very tight, and it's very hard for him to reach his goal, which is to get his sheep out of those thorn bushes. That is the meaning of dayqun, harajun. And so, when your heart becomes constricted, your mind is not open, you are not, because of your narrow preconceptions and your selfish desires, you are not able to open your heart and your mind, you cannot receive the message which God is trying to convey to you. But the person who has the open heart, whose mind is open to receiving divine guidance, then Allah guides that person to His message. And so there is no flaw in the message, but the flaw is in the person who receives it. Those people who want to be the centers of attention, they don't care what the story is about. They don't care whether it's right or wrong. They only are concerned about the person who is conveying that story. And so they condemn the prophet because they wish to be the prophet. They are jealous of him. They cannot accept something that they can't control and they cannot influence. But Allah, God Almighty, chose the Prophet Muhammad for the task which He gave him out of infinite wisdom. The Prophet Muhammad exemplified humility, modesty, kindness, truthfulness, and especially he was true to the message. That is, he didn't just convey the message. He wasn't as a microphone or a radio that simply conveys a message, but he was a living person who exemplified the truth of his message in everyday life. And so the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was the perfect example of a person whose heart and mind were open to the divine guidance and who humbly submitted himself to the will of God, not to his own selfish desires, but to the desire of his sustainer and his Lord Allah. وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا وَعَدْلًا. And so God's message to mankind or to humanity is perfected in truth and justice. And it was perfected in truth and justice in words in the Quran and in the life of the Messenger, peace and blessings be upon him. La mubaddil li kalimatih. And so nobody can change and alter the message of Allah. Wa huwa samiul alim. He is all hearing and all knowing. In truth and justice were your Lord's words. The promise of God was fulfilled, and there is no power to alter the fulfillment of His word. Allah's message is fulfilled in truth and justice, as-sidq wal-adl, and it can only be lived in truth and justice. And so a messenger who was less than truthful, was less than fair and just in every small matter and every big matter, could not fulfill the promise of God to guide humanity through His message. And so Allah's message is fulfilled in the messenger, not simply by sending down the Quran and having it read or recited to humanity, but by being lived in truth and justice. And only by exemplifying truth and justice are we exemplifying the message of Islam today in our own society. And so if we wish to convey this message, we must live it sincerely, truthfully, and we must practice justice and fairness in everything that we do. The messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, conveyed and fulfilled and exemplified and truly lived this message. In a similar way, the sunnah of the Prophet produced a way of life that exemplifies Islam and embodies Islam in a living society every day. Modern society is a society that is being led by different kind of media that are dominating thought and word and deed all over the world today. In the time of the Quran, the message was conveyed orally, by word, and it was in print. But more importantly, it was lived in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, in his followers, the companions, and in the followers and imams and leaders of Islam and the common people after him. But just as the leaders of his day were jealous of that society, so do we today find that many people are not willing to accept the messenger or his message because of their own personal feelings, hatreds, and emotions. This is what we're going to be dealing with in our program, Back to the Prophet. Please join me next time as we will continue discussing how the messenger exemplifies the message. May Allah Almighty guide all of us to the understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
When truth was lost and hearts were frozen, from you, Allah came a prophet chosen. Blessed Prophet Muhammad, obedient to you, taught us the things we ought to do. He taught us for certain that you are one, and that you have neither a daughter nor son. He taught us to be good to our mother and father, and that paradise lies under the feet of our mother. I love you, my prophet, and sing your praise, and follow your sunnah, prophetic ways. I love you, my prophet, and sing your praise, and follow your sunnah, prophetic ways.